Welcome to the first episode in our new series about the big ideas behind socialism and communism. In this series, we're diving into a book by Friedrich Engels called The Origin of the Family, Private Property, and the State. Don't worry, this isn't just for scholars or experts. It's a book about where the world we live in came from and how we can make it better. Why does this book matter? Well, Engels explains something super important: how private property, patriarchy, where men dominate over women, and class systems like slavery, feudalism, and capitalism got started. He shows us that things like inequality and oppression aren't natural. They didn't exist forever. They were created over time. For thousands of years, people lived in societies where resources were shared, and there wasn't domination of one group over another. But when people started farming and owning property, some groups gained power over others. That's when patriarchy and class systems started, and they've stuck around ever since. Here's the exciting part. Because these systems were created, they can also be changed. Humans have lived without inequality before, and we can do it again. This book helps us see how we can build a world where resources are shared and everyone gets a fair chance at life. Imagine a world where there were no cities, no farms, no factories, just endless wilderness. This was the dawn of modern humanity. Our ancestors were small bands of physically weak mammals compared to the predators and forces around them. But they had something special, an ability to think, to work together, and to imagine something better. It was this spark of intelligence that took us from surviving in the wild to becoming the most dominant species on Earth. In these early days, life was hard. People lived in small groups, hunting and gathering their food. They were at the mercy of nature. Storms, predators, and scarcity of resources could threaten their survival at any moment. Yet, they shared what they had. They worked together to protect their young and care for the sick and elderly. This was a time of primitive communism, when there was no private property, no rich or poor, no rulers or ruled. Everything belonged to the group. But let's be honest, this society wasn't perfect. There was conflict and violence. Disagreements over food or mating could lead to what we'd call injustice. Life was fragile, and the struggle for survival was constant. Still, these early humans lived without the hierarchies we see today. There was no patriarchy, no class system, no one dominating another for wealth or power. What makes this time remarkable isn't just the way they lived, but what it shows us about human potential. For thousands of years, humans shared resources and decisions. They lived in a way that reminds us societies can be built on cooperation, not competition. If it was possible then, it's possible for the future. Our ancestors didn't just survive, they thrived. With their minds, they invented tools, harnessed fire, and learned to adapt to their environment. This same ability to think and work together allowed us to leap from simple survival to creating entire civilizations. It's this same spirit that will take us to the stars, beyond the confines of this planet. At first, humans were hunter-gatherers, relying on nature for survival. But as our ancestors began farming and domesticating animals, they created something new: surplus. For the first time, they had more than they needed to survive. And this surplus changed everything. People started to take ownership of what they produced. Tools, land, and animals became personal possessions. Over time, this idea of ownership spread. What was once shared by the group now belonged to individuals or families. This shift created new divisions. Some people had more land, animals, and tools than others. Wealth, and with it power, began to concentrate in fewer hands. The old ways of living, where everyone had equal access to resources, began to disappear. With property came something else: the need to defend it. Engels explains how this gave rise to conflict and control. Those with more wealth needed systems to protect what they had: rules, enforcers, and eventually states. Property didn't just change how people lived, it changed how they related to each other. Engels shows us how the idea of property set the stage for the systems we know today. Slavery, feudalism, and capitalism all depend on private property. Each system divides people into those who own and those who don't. It creates classes where one group gains power by exploiting another. But Engels also reminds us that property wasn't always this way. For thousands of years, humans lived in societies without wealth or class divisions. Property as we know it is a human invention, not a law of nature. In those early societies, women played a central role. They gathered the majority of the food, created tools, and passed knowledge down through generations. Early families were often matrilineal, meaning inheritance and lineage were traced through the mother. This made sense in societies where communal living was the norm and paternity was uncertain. Families back then weren't structured like today. There were no strict rules about who could marry or live together. Instead, relationships were fluid and bonds were built on mutual support. But this changed as private property emerged. With the rise of property came the need to pass wealth down to heirs. This shifted power away from women and toward men, leading to what Engels calls the world historic defeat of the female sex. Families became patriarchal, structured to ensure the father's control over property and lineage. Women's roles were diminished and their independence was stripped away. The nuclear family as we know it today is deeply tied to this history. It wasn't created for love or partnership. It was designed to serve patriarchy and protect property. At times, the patriarchal family structure has confined women to the home, but this has never fully captured the reality. In every society dominated by patriarchal family norms, women have often been required to work outside the home, whether due to economic necessity, when a husband's income was insufficient to sustain a family, or as a result of systemic oppression, women have historically labored alongside men. For historically oppressed groups, this often meant toiling in fields or industries as serfs, slaves, or other forms of exploited labor, serving the interests of elite men and women. Despite these variations, the patriarchal family has consistently upheld structures of inequality. But the history of human societies also gives us hope. Engels reminds us that the patriarchal family wasn't always the norm, and it doesn't have to be our future. By understanding where these systems came from, we can imagine a world where relationships are built on equality and cooperation, not domination. So, what does this mean for the future of the family? Do communists dream of returning to the group marriages or communal living that existed in primitive communism? No. Are we against monogamy? Absolutely not. The goal isn't to dictate how people should form families or relationships. Instead, it's about creating a world where relationships are based on equality and freedom, not economic pressures or outdated power dynamics. What we envision is a society where people can bond freely, guided by mutual affection, care, and trust. A world where partnerships aren't shaped by the need to secure property or wealth, but are instead formed purely out of love and choice. This means rejecting the structures that enforce inequality and domination, while embracing the freedom for individuals to define their relationships in ways that bring them happiness. This video only scratched the surface of Friedrich Engels' groundbreaking book, The Origin of the Family, Private Property, and the State. There's so much more to explore, from the historical roots of the state to the complex transformations of human society. But what about you? Did we miss something important? Were there any details you think we got wrong? We want to hear your thoughts. Let's keep the conversation going in the comments section below. Share your insights, your critiques, or even your questions. We're all here to learn together. If you found this video helpful, give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to turn on notifications to stay updated on future content.